Go ahead, throw those in the chat box. So here we go. All right. So when we get to our Reveal My DNA test, last week we did DNA protection. 2 weeks ago, I should say. Today's cardiovascular support. We're going to talk about the test with as it leans into cardiovascular support. Here's one of the many body systems that the Reveal My DNA test gives us incredible detailed findings on, why it's so important. So first of all, we're going to look at these different tests, right? We're going to, these different genes, and then find out our unique health needs. The needs are macros, micronutrients, minerals, plant-based phytochemicals, exercise, and sleep. And the reported findings will give us specific genotypes that show very specific metabolic needs. And the test is so specific to tell you if you have a normal, increase, or very high need to support different parts, risk factors for heart health, right? So once we find our genetic dietary needs, including those macronutrients such as fats, carbs, and proteins, amino acids, phytonutrients, vitamins, and minerals, how do we address it? Well, first of all, as we've been saying here in this class for a long time, it's great to find out your DNA risk factors, but it's not very useful if there are no actionable steps to take, right? I always pause here for a minute because this is where a lot of feedback has come in with the APOE4, the allele 4 test for Alzheimer's. There is definitive research now finding that people have 2 allele 4s, they're going to have a 95% chance of getting Alzheimer's. And a lot of people are saying, I don't want to know then. That's just too scary for me. That's it's not helpful. It's not something I want to know, especially because the current treatment is not great for it regarding medical side. However, all the genes and SNPs, the genotypes we study here from the Reveal My DNA test, come from data with outcomes from studies. So they're not just, hey, here's what your test says, but this is here what your test says, and here's what to do about it, inclusive of those APOE4 genes. So if you have those alleles, there are action steps you can take: diet, nutrition, lifestyle, exercise, to make changes and reduce those effects of those genes and either enhance the benefit parts of them or suppress the negative parts. And that's really the most important thing. So although there might not be a drug on the market for Alzheimer's, there certainly are nutrition and lifestyle and dietary changes you can make to really mitigate the effects of it if you know exactly what to do based on your specific genotype. Okay, so really what this test does is provide us with multiple steps to provide to take action with to support your or your patient's own genotype. So the cardiovascular genotype results, there are 12 cardiovascular genotypes provided to you in the DNA test. 2 main points to remember are, first, you can change your heart health immediately by making changes based on your specific DNA, right? Or your patients, of course. Second, you can influence the future of the cardiovascular health by action steps you take today. Remember, every single day, we can positively or negatively influence our epigenetics, right? Now, this is the sample Reveal My DNA report. This is kind of the different groups, right? And the research summary. And this is what the test looks like. And we're going to get into this entire cardiovascular section. But as anything changes in someone's health, we can always look to the answers here. And we're going to get into that the second half of this presentation. But I want you to know, and this is very important, if this looks at all intimidating, I assure you it is not. This is a small portion of what you see in the DNA report. Again, it's color-coded to simplify the findings, with green, good, to orange, medium, and red as a larger risk. The DNA report from the Reveal My DNA provides you a roadmap to successfully get you from A to Z, This is a sample of a few findings you'll get in that DNA report, like HDL and LDL. And remember, DNA is so important. DNA is not your destiny, just your potential. Potential for good, potential for bad. It doesn't mean you're going to be there. Could be there. So here's the first finding of the 12 major findings within the test of the DNA report. The first one, hold on a second, that's someone coming in here. The first finding here, the HDL and LDL levels, right? And so we're looking at the genes related to high density lipids and low density lipids. We can also see if one is predisposed toward elevated or lower levels of these lipids, and also the genetic risks of both HDL function and LDL oxidation, right? You can also see where the genes are negatively influenced from things such as mercury and elevated homocysteine, and where they're positively influenced, like organic foods and certain minerals. These are very specific recommendations from the high Oxford rated studies that we have. Sorry. So for example, if those HDL and LDL levels, if you come with the genotype where you have a risk, then the suggestions could be increasing organic foods, calcium, magnesium, etc., fiber, niacin, anthocyanins, and Indian gooseberries. They've all been studied in the effect of reducing LDL and HDL levels. The second finding is apolipoprotein B. And again, if one has this polymorphism, we see the single nucleotide polymorphism. We see the positive actions that one can take based on real clinical studies. It's super important. Okay, so the ApoB protein that's involved in metabolism of lipids, it's the main protein constituent of lipoproteins. High levels of ApoB, especially with the higher LDL particle concentrations, a primary driver of arterial plaque in our blood vessels. Then we've got the PPAR alpha polymorphism that's been associated with ApoB in many populations. Some genotypes are associated with these elevated ApoB risks, so lower saturating fat intake and increasing polyunsaturated fat is often recommended. It can also be targeted with astaxanthin, which is high and naturally occurring in wild salmon. It's in blueberry, phytochemical pterostilbene in blueberries, mulberries, cranberries, bilberries, and raw almonds. Yummy stuff, good snacks. Genistein from fermented soy. Where else would we find this? Genistein, fermented soy. Anybody want to guess? It's kind of a growing supplement, excited supplement out there in the world. Anybody? Come on. Sort in the chat. Jeremy, Rhonda. Nattokinase, that's right. Nattokinase. Super important for lowering the PPAR alpha. So, there's another way you can see how something like nattokinase can help. Tomatoes, cinnamon, zinc, lion's mane mushroom, Ganoderma tea, and L-carnitine. So you see there's a lot of different ways to support the body here. And the heart if you have this risk. Next is your VLDLs, your elevated, very low density lipid proteins. And this puts people at risk for arterial and atherosclerosis, plaque deposits on artery walls, and increase the risk of heart disease. The people who have the variants in this PPAR alpha have been found to have larger waist circumferences and a higher proportion of small, dense LDL particles, or as we like to say, the VLDLs. And these genotypes associated with a higher proportion of small LDL particles following a high saturated fat and low polyunsaturated fat diet. If following high saturated fat and low polyunsaturated fat diet. If there is a polymorphism, there are dietary and nutrient recommendations to be made. We'll get into that when we go over the test, the report itself. Next are triglycerides. Variants in the FADS1 SNP. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize it. It's all in the report. Associated with higher elevated triglyceride levels. I'm going to show you what it looks like in the report. Some genotypes are associated with elevated triglycerides, of course. And numerous studies found that omega-3 fatty acids administered as fish oil supplements lowers plasma triglyceride levels by 25 to 34%. No other changes, just doing the fish oil. So that's nice. And then you've got your lipoprotein A, which some cardiologists say is maybe the top risk factor for heart disease and a potential heart event. It's a sticky form of LDL that appears to affect plaque growth. LDL particle size and risks increase the risk of plaque rupture and blood clotting, and both of those are a heart event, obviously, and that's what we want to avoid. Next, raw plant intake. There's a gene that really supports heart health based on raw plant intake. Raw plants themselves are self-explanatory. I think you understand what that is. But nitric oxide, that's a bit more complex. With the uncoupling of nitric oxide, it's been linked to play an essential role in cardiovascular pathologies, including dilated cardiomyopathy, ischemia, reperfusion injury, endothelial dysfunction, atherosclerosis, and hypertension. So what is happening there? So nitric oxide, of course, is very important to the vascular system. And it's a vasodilator, right? It's also diet mediated. So it is controlled by the foods you eat. You need foods that are rich in a compound called BH4, tetrahydrobiopterin. BH4 is essential for the synthesis of two major neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin. It is also essential for the synthesis of nitric oxide, which, apart from its vascular role, also acts as a modulator of neurotransmission, including neurotransmitters such as serotonin, tyrosinase, and dopamine. And the report will show us here how to support that. So how do we support that? We have this risk of higher than average need for folate to produce adequate BH4, the precursor to nitric oxide. It's depleted by high blood sugar. So, another reason why sugar is not good. High omega-6 intake, especially related to 3. Chronic stress. Well, we all know that's not good. High levels of mercury. Because people know, other than like amalgam fillings, one of the largest sources of mercury, other than fish, in the United States. Throw it in the chat if you do know. Talked about it before here. It comes in the detoxification section a lot in this test where mercury resides. Anybody want to guess where Americans would be getting? Well, no, amalgam fillings, yes, of course, and seafood, fish. We, aside from those two, where else we could find it? Mercury vapor from the burning of coal. So that's something to be aware of if you live near coal burning power plants. Arsenic, lead, and always people say, oh, it's pollution, air pollution, and all that. And people who live near air pollution have unhealthier outcomes. There are other things like reasons why, right? It's because mercury. It's not just because it's making you mad as a hatter, but it's actually getting in the body and depleting BH4 levels, and that is affecting all the heart issues up here. So, again, just a bad substance to have. Arsenic, lead, aluminum, aspartame, and oxidative stress. So these are all things that need to be eliminated if possible. Yeah. Other strategies to increase BH4 include, so here's the avoidance section, but now we want to increase vitamin C complex or foods rich in vitamin C, L-arginine, that's a amino acid. B6, foods rich in, magnesium, selenium, foods rich in. So, again, this is not like, it's not all gloom and doom, right? Here's the gloom and the doom, but then here's the good. How do we fix? And that's the important part. Next, in the 12 major findings are homocysteine. It's that non-protein amino acids produced from methionine, can be recycled back into methionine and converted into cysteine in the methylation cycle. High homocysteine levels have been connected to pressure, blood clots, inflammation, macular degeneration, dementia, and cancer. Homocysteine is another important marker for cardiovascular disease and something we all want lower levels of. If this is a big risk factor for the patient in the DNA test, we suggest to get their blood work tested for the immediate status of homocysteine, and then concurrently move to support the methylation cycle with the information provided by the report, right? Patients have a higher than average need for folate to mean healthy homocysteine levels very often. Next is blood pressure. Age-related increases in blood pressure have been observed in almost every population. Here are some of the risk factors. Many genotypes are associated with above normal blood pressure levels. However, close proximity to the equator, higher temperatures, ultraviolet radiation, summertime, and longer hours of sunlight have been associated with lower blood pressure. So we're coming into the part of the year that blood pressure should naturally decrease. Distances further from the equator with fewer hours of sunlight and winter has been associated with higher blood pressure levels. While many genes are connected to blood pressure, these genes respond to keeping total fat intake below 37% of the diet and increasing bilberries or blueberries, grapes, raw garlic, cinnamon, and jasmine. Good healthy foods. Next in the major findings, deep vein thrombosis. So this occurs, a blood clot forms in the vein deep inside the part of the body and is most common for those over 60. Variants in the F5 gene increase the risk of the DVT. F5 is another genetic cardiovascular risk and potential marker for a cardiovascular event. This allows someone with a risk factor to make immediate dietary and nutritional action to decrease the risk level. Anybody want to guess a substance you could utilize to help that immediately? Supplement, maybe. Come on. Rhonda, help again. Anyone paying attention out there? DVT. Yes, nattokinase. DVT. We're getting a blood clot, fibrin. Need to break that down. Rutin would be protecting against the cause initially, the tearing of the blood vessel, and maybe the throwing of the blood clot in the first place. But once you're there, and even before you get there, nattokinase can really support that. All right, gout is next. A variant in the ABCG2. Wouldn't it be better if it was just ABCD? But ABCG2 gene have been associated with elevated uric acid levels. And epidemiological studies shown that uric acid levels are positively correlated with gout, hypertension, atherosclerosis, atrial fibrillation, and heart failure. That's why it's, well, you see gout here. You see gout, that's not part of the cardiovascular system. Oh, yes, it is. Look at this. Hypertension, atherosclerosis, AFib, heart failure. So there is a connection. Everything's connected to everything. You might think of it as a kidney liver problem and it might start there, but it is a risk factor to cardiovascular disease. So some genotypes associated with increased uric acid levels and elevated uric acid levels significantly stronger in men, post-menopausal women, hormone therapy users. Many genotype increases sensitivity to sugar. Well, that's easily avoidable, kind of. Alcohol intake, high purine foods like liver, and dehydration with the development of gout. I'm not, this is once you have gout. I think liver is great until then. Dehydration important this time of year, right now. Stay hydrated. And we have a lot of strategies to help you with that. And if you want to ask me, we can talk about it. So what do we do? Avoid refined sugars, increase your water intake, parsley, quercetin, camphorol, olive oil, vitamin C complex, all good choices. But it all should be done, not just one thing. So next, the 12 major findings. We got fibrinogen again. It's a soluble protein. The plasma is broken down to fibrin by the enzyme from thrombin to form clots. Fibrinogen serves to stop excessive bleeding, of course, but in high amounts can cause blood clots. So look at this here. People with elevated fibrinogen must avoid BPA plastic. So now what? Bisphenol A plastic. What are they going to go to the moon or something? We get that from unfiltered tap water, phthalates. These are like, and PFAS chemicals for sure. Look, adeninokinase, fibrinogen levels are elevated. So I think it's incredibly interesting. Those with the genotype for increased risk of blood clots do better when they avoid bisphenol A plastic, BPA plastic, chemicals in water, and phthalates. And the correlation of gut bacteria and maybe inflammation from the plastic and chemicals, if that makes sense, because the BPAs can kill good gut flora, can increase inflammation from the plastic and chemical that's in you. And certainly we can't necessarily see the immediate effects of the massive pollution around us, but there are internal insidious effects that are chronic and mounting. Think about where this pollution comes into our bodies, just in our communities. Forget the globe, forget the oceans and all the plastic in the ocean. I mean, that it's hard to get your head around. But just think about your own town, your own city, your own state, and what it will take just to clean up the environment around where you live. There was a story in the Washington Post this week about plastic, and it was crazy. I read it. I'll get the name of it for you. It's called the plastics we breathe, and it was in this past weekend's Washington Post. Most common microplastics, they're tiny, and they're like these little microns. They're like in your hair, and then they get down here and you breathe them in, and they get through your natural defenses, get in your body and create chronic inflammation because your immune cells can't break them down because they're so tightly bound, and it just creates all kinds of havoc inside you. So one of the huge sources are plastic water bottles. It sloughs off microplastic, for sure. Plastics that we use, carry out containers to wrap our food or in our homes, and then our synthetic clothing. Microplastics are in there, and they get into the air in our homes. Every time you do laundry, it gets back in the water stream because all the synthetic clothes that we make and wear, some of it comes out in the wash, literally. So in this case, it's all around us all the time. And then some people have even greater genetic risk to it. So they really have to avoid plastic stuff, and they need filtered tap water and such. In those cases, you also need to increase lactobacillus and possibly add the nattokinase. This would be like a daily amount, especially if the fibrinogen levels are elevated. Lastly, the 12 major findings for cardiovascular health found in the DNA report is hemochromatosis. So think of it's an iron overload, right? Due to increased iron absorption and disrupted iron metabolism. People have a genetic mutation, comprise 85 to 90% of those with hemochromatosis. And cardiac, so how does that relate? So how does excessive iron affect the blood, affect the heart? The heart. It becomes primary iron overload. And there's a condition, it's called cardiac hemochromatosis, or primary iron overload cardiomyopathy. It's an important and potentially preventable disease of heart failure. Patients may be asymptomatic early on in the disease. Once heart failure develops, there's rapid deterioration. Cardiac hemochromatosis causes a dilated cardiomyopathy with dilated ventricles, so they're not tight in contraction. low left ventricle ejection fraction, and decreased fractional shortening. This is why hemochromatosis is in our cardiovascular section, right? So again, reveals a one-of-a-kind DNA support, focus on healthcare practitioners like yourselves. It uses that targeted NGS testing for its accuracy, scope, and privacy. Exclusive contract with Gene by Gene, which is our state-of-the-art DNA testing laboratory in Houston. We do not sell the private DNA information ever. There's that quick turnaround. The practitioner portal is for easy access, and we have affordable wholesale test pricing compared to what's out there in the marketplace. So now, any questions on any of that, fire away. I'm going to get us to the report. We're going to look at it. So this is, this is what it looks like when you get it back. And this is a real report from somebody. Let me get you up to the top here. So we saw the breakdown of all 12 heart health sections. We talked about a lot of the strategies you would do if they came up positive. And this is the way you would see it. And of course, myself or your DNA, Reveal DNA rep is available to help you navigate this. And of course, any questions you have at all you see here, please throw in the chat. All right, so you see this now. My DNA cardiovascular health and exercise section is the HDL and LDL first section, right? So we talked about that. We talked about all of these. I just wanted you to see what it might look like. And you'll see it's kind of up and down, depending on the person. So this person had no risk factors genetically on the HDL and LDL. That's good. However, they had a high priority around the VLDL. So they have a risk if they follow a high saturated fat and low polyunsaturated fat diet. So either they need to decrease their saturated fat or increase their polyunsaturated fat, or both. That's what I'd say. Next, triglycerides, medium priority. So again, this is somebody you might want to get on the fish oil to help lower plasma triglyceride levels. Next, as we saw before, APOB. This person's also high priority. This person just actually has a really good, rich cardiovascular report. So that's why we're doing it. So we already talked about what it is, and again, the risks and what to do. So lowering fat intake, increasing polyunsaturated fat intake is also recommended, and then looking at these foods. And at the end, I'm going to go down the dietary section. We're going to look at that. When you see a genistein, fermented soy, that's just saying nattokinase. That's easy enough there. They're good for LPA, which is, remember when I said lipoprotein A, that's one very high risk for a cardiac event, especially because you get a plaque rupture, thrombosis, or you have a, well, anyway. Next is raw plant intake. We talked about that. So you have a need for raw fruits and vegetables. They're always good for people, everybody. Can never do wrong eating raw fruits and veggies. Nitric oxide, we talked about this before, high priority. So this person, higher than average need for folate to produce adequate BH4, the precursor to nitric oxide. And again, you can see the dietary things to do and strategies to increase and things to avoid if you have this, indeed have these genotypes. Not that mercury would be good for anybody. Homocysteine next, this person also a high priority there. You need to watch that homocysteine level for sure, and the good healthy methylation. This person also is a risk for the high blood pressure. So what are we going to do? We're going to look at sunlight and also supporting lowering total fat intake, increasing bilberry, grapes, raw garlic, cinnamon, and jasmine. And here also pause and say, these are very specific options, and you can do other things, but these are things that are actually in clinical trials and studies that help people with this genotype with high blood pressure. So that's why they're in here and chosen. And a lot of people like grapes, right? Blood clots, this person did not have any risk factors around them. Uric acid, same thing. The gout was not a problem. And hemochromatosis. So no risk for that cardiac hemochromatosis issue at all. Now, further along in this section, which doesn't make it into my presentation, but is here for you, is the exercise section. And I have to say, of all the sections, the exercise section is probably the most self-explanatory. There's not a lot of medical stuff happening around this section of the test. Basically, it's just telling you, hey, do you have a power athlete potential? Medium. Okay, why? Because of this. Do you have inflammation around this type of exercise? Yes or no? And you can read about what to do if you want to increase recovery. Curcumin, for example. Exercise, endurance exercise and inflammation, again, average. High intensity exercise, inflammation, less. So, you can look at this, the patient can look at this, and they can understand what type of exercise they can do that will maintain the lowest levels of inflammation for them. And then if they, but they're into something that has a higher level of inflammation for them, like weightlifting, they can get over here and look at some of the strategies to avoid it in terms of the inflammation, not the exercise. Then you've got risks around ACL and shoulder dislocations and ankle and hamstring risk injuries. Cold endurance, that's important to people, how long they can endure cold, and their VO2 max trainability and how to support that. And then your caffeine response for exercise. For fast metabolizers, we found shown increase in exercise performance for activities under 1 hour from caffeine consumption, probably driving, some cortisol levels and some blood sugar, maybe into the some sugar into the blood and or into the muscle. So you can get a little effect there. But I certainly don't know if that's a healthy way to go long term. And then over 1 hour, it'll tell you about that. So this is really stuff you can just review. It's not so important about making recommendations or not, but they can review it with you and find out. But the cardiovascular for sure. So now we go back down into that diet section because we saw all those recommendations, especially like folate, right? Because the homocysteine for this person. So you'd see a lot of different foods that have been linked to very rich levels of folate. And then, some other things. Omega-3s for this person. Free range eggs, they call them pastured eggs. That means being out in the pasture. And so on and so forth, right? A lot of good healthy foods this person should be eating. And I also want to show you the blood work. So because it was a high risk, they recommend if this person does get blood work done to have the apolipoprotein B tested, have the homocysteine tested, and some other things. So if you get these things tested, then they can start making those dietary changes and move in a healthy direction and see if we get the blood values to change. This does not mean they have elevated any of these things or low. It just means they're at a genetic risk factor. And therefore, if cardiovascular disease runs the family, they should get it checked. So on and so forth. So again, it doesn't mean your current levels are low. It just means they, based on a variety of genetic factors, variants could make it more difficult to obtain recommended levels circulating D, for example. So that's that. Any questions with our cardiovascular / exercise section? Anything you saw today at all? No? Okay. Well then,